Well, I've got three things, excuse me, to throw out there at you. The first one, of course, because I don't think we've gotten to do this yet, have we? But talk about a little ice, Matty Ice, Matt
Yeah.
Ryan. I don't think we've got to speak about the Colts' newest acquisition.
And we met him 2 weeks ago, I think. Gosh, it's crazy. It feels like longer than that. But yeah, this is it's an exciting move because what you're getting right now is a guy that still allows the Colts to compete, to have a legitimate chance to be a force in the AFC next season, and it's a crowded conference. We've talked about that. But also, more importantly, you have a legitimate chance to win the AFC South next year. You are a legitimate contender to win the division for the first time since 2014 because he's one of the most prolific passers, quarterbacks in the NFL since breaking into the league in 2008. I mean, I think he is eighth all time, or excuse me, he's fifth all time in passing yards and eighth all time in passing touchdowns. And I think had he won that Super Bowl a couple years ago, I think we'd be talking about as if this guy's a potential future Hall of Famer. And he's 36, going to be 37 next month. And he still looks like he's in really good shape and a guy that can play for another, he thinks he can play well into his 40s. At the very least, I think he can play for another 2, 3, 4 years. He's under contract for another 2. And I think bigger picture, everybody knows what this is. It's on the par with the Phillip Rivers a couple of years ago. I think everybody thought back then that the Rivers deal would be at least a 2-year marriage between he and the Colts. It didn't work out that way. I think this is a little bit different. I think everybody knows this is going to be at least 2 years, probably more. But what this does, it allows the Colts time to really figure out what they're going to do long-term at quarterback. Maybe it's next offseason or the offseason after that where they trade up in the draft and get that future quarterback. Because ideally what's going to happen is, again, the Colts will compete and they'll be a legitimate force in the AFC. But with that, you're going to be picking in the 20s or the 30s, depending on how well this goes. And that's a really hard place to be in to find, future long-term franchise quarterbacks. But next offseason or the offseason after that, if they want to trade up and get a guy they absolutely love, that they fall in love with, it allows them, an opportunity to do that without pushing the envelope, without going all in on a guy they're just not sure of. So it buys them time to do that either in the draft or to pull off a big trade for someone, like we've seen the Rams do with Matthew Stafford or what the Broncos did with Russell Wilson. It allows them time to really kind of figure out and hone in on who that long-term quarterback is going to be, but also at the same time not mortgaging the great roster that you have right now with guys like DeForest Buckner and Darius Leonard and Jonathan Taylor and Quentin Nelson. I mean, this team's ready to go. They were a quarterback away last year, in my opinion, in a few games from making the playoffs. They were 9-8, and obviously the season ended very poorly down the stretch. And it's not all on Carson Wentz, right? There's a lot of areas of the team that did not play well down the stretch of the season. But I think Matt Ryan gives this offense stability. He'll make plays that maybe the offense didn't make last season to put them in a better spot. And it's just exciting because they now can win in the short term while they figure out how they're going to win in the long term without mortgaging, a lot of draft picks and overextending themselves for someone they're just not dead set on.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, Matt. And one of the first things that I thought of when, it was announced that Matt Ryan was coming to Indianapolis was the fact that I thought back to Jim Irsay and how he's talked about in the past, I want to be able to win now, but we also want to set ourselves up for success in the future. It's almost you're going to have your cake and eat it too, because they get that impact quarterback that can help get them to the playoffs and maybe make a push towards the Super Bowl. But then, like you said, they're going to get this opportunity now to buy some time and see what they can do. Maybe you draft a guy, maybe you get a guy through trades, and then kind of groom your next quarterback hopefully for the next 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, and maybe that guy can be on the roster under Matt Ryan and learn from one of the great ones of the last 15 years or so. Maybe that's an option as well. But it's, as soon as Andrew Luck retired, the Colts were in probably the most unique situation in the NFL because they needed a quarterback, but they were a good team. Normally, if you need a quarterback, you're an awful team, like the Jacksonville Jaguars or the New York Jets, right? You're picking high in the draft, and the Colts haven't been in that situation. And, this is not making excuses whatsoever, because you are what your record says you are. But I'd like to see other teams in the NFL, have 4 different quarterbacks in 4 years and see what their record is. Have a franchise quarterback that you thought was going to be your guy, that you built the team around, or at least on offense built the team around for the next, you thought he was going to be there for the next 6-7 years. Then all of a sudden, just 2 weeks before the season, he has what happened, had what happened to him, and then, decided to take his livelihood in his own hands and decide to retire. That's a really hard position to be in. And I think all of the decisions that the Colts have made at quarterback since then have been logical. And if you just take them in a vacuum, they've made a lot of sense. I mean, obviously in 2019, 2 weeks before the season, you got to ride with Jacoby Brissett. Then in 2020, there's that connection with Phillip Rivers. It's a very unique situation to be in. You got to capitalize on that. And again, he decides to retire. Not many people thought that was going to happen. And then in 2021, you bring in Carson Wentz. You trade a first-round pick for him. You don't do that move thinking it's only going to be 1 year. It doesn't work out for whatever reason. And now here they are again going after Matt Ryan. So it's no excuses. You got to win the division. That's always the goal. Got to make the playoffs. The standard is much higher than the results have showed these last couple of seasons. But the fact that I think there's 7 games over 500 in the last 4 years with 4 different quarterbacks, like that's pretty impressive for Frank Reich, being able to, maximize the really crummy hand he's been given in this game of poker at quarterback. So again, no excuses, but I think right now the Colts are in a good position to be able to, again, be a viable contender for the now, but also not mortgaging what they're trying to do long-term, and keep this roster, this core group of players intact, and have a legitimate chance to win.
How about Indiana's newest commitment, Declan McMahon? Is that
the McMahon is that the McMahon that I'm thinking of?
Can you smell what the Rock is cooking?
Is that the XFL McMahon? Because if it is, that's awesome. Is he a good player or just a good last name?
XFL. Yes, that's not what I thought of him as first.
Well,
XFL.
But he was in the XFL.
No,
he started.
I get it. I get it. It's
not
great,
a football
actually.
tie.